The air felt thick with the scent of rain that hadn't quite arrived yet as I pulled up to the scene. It was a small town, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, or at least they thought they did. But tonight, something was different. Christie Wilson had disappeared. One minute she was at the bar with friends, the next, nothing. The call had come in just after midnight, and I had rushed to the scene. A missing persons case. The worst part of my job wasn't the investigation. It wasn't the late nights, the stress, or the mounting pressure. It was the uncertainty. When someone disappears, you never know what you're dealing with. Was it a runaway, a simple misunderstanding, or was it something more? I stepped out of my car, scanning the area. The lights of the small apartment complex flickered faintly in the distance. I walked towards the front door, where a few neighbors had gathered, some of them whispering. The usual scene, the fear, the uncertainty, the murmurs of gossip. But this wasn't just some kid skipping town. Christie Wilson wasn't like that. People didn't just vanish without a reason. Inside, I found Christie's roommate standing in the living room, nervously wringing her hands. She was in her early 20s, dressed in a long sweater, her eyes puffy from what looked like hours of crying. "You found her, right?" she asked, her voice desperate. "We're still looking," I said, keeping my tone calm. It wasn't the time for promises I couldn't keep. Christie's things were scattered around the apartment. The TV was on, a half-empty glass of wine on the counter, and her phone was still plugged into the charger in the corner of the room. A bag of chips was open on the coffee table, but there were no signs of a struggle. Everything was as it should be, except for the fact that Christie was missing. Something didn't add up. "Have you heard from her?" I asked her roommate, pulling my notebook out. "No, she..." The roommate paused, her face creased in concern. "She left the bar around 11. She was supposed to text me when she got home. She said she was fine, but then nothing. I called her phone, but it just went to voicemail. I thought maybe she was just drunk or passed out somewhere." "But you never thought to call the cops?" I asked, feeling a sharpness in my voice. But I immediately regretted it. She was just scared, like everyone else. She bit her lip and shook her head. I didn't want to overreact. It's just so unlike her." The roommate led me to the couch where Christie had left her phone. I picked it up, checking for recent messages. There were a couple of texts from friends, but nothing out of the ordinary. What I was looking for, however, was the call log. A few incoming calls at 11:20 and 11:35 p.m. All from a number she didn't recognize. The same number kept calling, but Christie never answered. I put the phone down, carefully, making a note of the number. There was something about it. Something that made my stomach twist. I turned back to the roommate. "Anyone who might have had a problem with her? An ex, someone from work?" She looked down, biting her lip. She had a boyfriend, Evan. He's kind of intense. She'd been talking about breaking up with him, but I don't think he knows. I nodded. It was a lead, but I had to keep my head clear. Emotions could cloud your judgment in these kinds of cases. I excused myself and walked outside to the parking lot, hoping to catch something the others had missed. As I stood under the dim glow of the streetlight, my mind started racing. It could be 100 different things, but one thing was certain. Something didn't feel right. Christie wasn't the kind of person who disappeared without a reason. The dispatcher had sent a patrol car to the bar where she had been seen last. I needed to follow up, so I grabbed my phone and called them for an update. The officer on duty confirmed the bar staff had seen her leave, heading towards the parking lot at around 11 p.m. The CCTV footage they had was blurry, but it showed Christie walking toward a dark sedan parked in the farthest corner of the lot. Then the footage cut out. "Is the sedan registered to anyone we know?" I asked the officer. They were still working on it, but so far no match. I stared into the distance, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Missing persons cases were always messy. There were so many variables. But the longer you went without any clear evidence, the darker the story usually became. Around 2:30 a.m., we received a call from the local motel on the outskirts of town. The clerk had reported a suspicious man checking in with a young woman who seemed reluctant. The description fit Evan, Christie's boyfriend, and the woman, though he'd said it was his girlfriend, didn't look happy to be with him. According to the clerk, she had wiped away a tear when he wasn't looking. I didn't waste time. We were already heading to the motel. I could feel the shift in the air. The longer someone was missing, the worse the possibilities became. The path ahead was unclear, but there was no going back now. We had a name, we had a lead, and we were about to find out what Evan had to say. The motel was old, the kind of place that had seen better days. Faded neon signs flickered weakly in the distance as we pulled into the parking lot. The night was still, the silence broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning unit. I got out of the car, my boots hitting the cracked pavement, and walked toward the lobby where a tired-looking clerk stood behind a desk. "Can I help you?" he asked, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "Detective Hayes," I said, showing my badge. "We're looking for a woman who might have checked in with a man earlier tonight. She's missing, 5'4", brown hair, wearing a red dress. Have you seen her?" The clerk glanced up slowly. He studied my face for a moment before answering. "Yeah, I remember her. She came in with a guy. He seemed kind of jumpy. Told me they were on their way to a wedding, but she wasn't acting like she was here for a party." I frowned. "How did she seem?" He hesitated, nervous, like she didn't want to be here. When they checked in, she kept looking around, kind of darting her eyes. It was strange." I nodded. "Did you see anything else unusual? Anything she said? Or him?" The clerk scratched his head. "No, not really. But I did notice something odd. He had a weird way of talking to her, like he'd say something and she'd just nod. She didn't really say much at all. And before they went up to the room, I saw her wipe a tear from her eye. I don't know, I just thought it was weird, you know?" "Did he check in under his name?" I asked. "Yeah, the name he gave me was Evan Hall." I made a mental note of the name and turned to leave, motioning for my team to follow. We had a name now, and the more I learned, the less I liked what I was hearing. Evan Hall was Christie's boyfriend, but the way the clerk described him, jumpy, controlling, raised a lot of red flags. Christie hadn't been happy with him for a while, according to her roommate. Could this be a domestic situation that had escalated? I didn't have all the answers yet, but Evan was quickly becoming the focal point of our investigation. We approached the room where they had checked in. It was on the second floor, the furthest corner of the building. The door was closed, but the faintest sound of movement came from inside. My gut told me this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. I motioned for my team to stay quiet as I knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps echoed in the still air. "Who is it?" a voice called from the other side, its tone flat, almost bored. "Detective Hayes," I said, showing my badge again. "We need to speak with you." There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling. The door cracked open, and I saw Evan standing there, his eyes immediately darting to the side. He was tall, maybe in his late 20s, with dark, shaggy hair. His face was gaunt, his jaw clenched. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice a little too sharp. He was trying to sound calm, but I could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands fidgeted behind his back. A man on edge. "We're investigating the disappearance of Christie Wilson," I said. "She went missing tonight. I understand you're her boyfriend." His eyes flickered for a moment before he nodded. "Yeah, that's right. What's this about?" "She's probably just out with friends or something. She does that sometimes." I studied his face, looking for signs of guilt. There were none. But then again, people don't show guilt in ways you expect. You learn to read the small things, the nervous tics, the way someone avoids eye contact. Evan wasn't doing any of those things, but something felt off. The way he spoke, the way he dismissed her disappearance so easily. I wasn't buying it. "I'd like to talk to you for a moment if you don't mind," I said, pushing a little. Evan hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing us into the room. The place was small and sparsely furnished. A bed, a TV, a small desk with an open laptop. Nothing unusual, no signs of struggle. But something about the way the room felt, the quietness, the stillness, felt wrong. "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" I asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Evan shook his head, his eyes darting nervously. "I already told you, I don't know where she is. We were at the bar, she left, and I haven't heard from her since. She's probably just—" "Just what?" I asked, my voice flat. He froze. "She does this sometimes, okay? She goes off and does her own thing, and I don't know where she is for a couple hours, but she always comes back. She always comes back." I leaned forward, staring at him. "I don't think she's out with friends, Evan. This isn't like her. And your story isn't adding up. Tell me, when was the last time you spoke to her? Was it before she went missing, or after?" Evan swallowed hard. His fingers twitched at his sides. I don't know," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know what happened. I haven't heard from her." Something wasn't right. His voice wavered, but there was no emotion in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't concern. It was something else, something darker. He was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. "Did you have a fight with her?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. His eyes snapped to mine. "No," he said too quickly. "No, we didn't fight. She just needed some space. She's fine. She'll be fine." I let the silence stretch between us. His response wasn't convincing, and I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, heavy with uncertainty. My gut told me he was lying, but I needed something more concrete. I needed proof. I stood up, signaling for my team to move. "We'll be in touch, Evan. Don't leave town." The hours stretched on like an eternity. Back at the station, I sat at my desk, looking over the notes. Christie Wilson's disappearance was becoming more than just a simple missing persons case. The more I dug into Evan Hall, the more contradictions I found. There was something lurking beneath the surface of his story, something he wasn't saying, but I couldn't prove it, not yet. I had sent out a few officers to canvass the local area again, checking with local businesses, asking around about Evan's whereabouts after he'd checked into the motel. They came back empty-handed. No one had seen anything suspicious, and the surveillance footage from the bar was as useless as the clerk's vague recollection. It showed Christie leaving, sure, but it didn't tell me where she went after that. I went over the facts again. Christie was last seen at 11:30 p.m. Her phone went dead right after that. Her friends hadn't heard from her. No one had. And the most unsettling part, Evan's reluctance to cooperate. He had answered questions, sure, but there was no urgency, no concern in his voice. It was like he was simply playing the role of the worried boyfriend. The more I listened to his words in my head, the more I heard the lies hidden between the lines. It was time to dig deeper. I pulled up Evan's background and started with the basics. A simple Google search showed me the bare minimum. Evan Hall, age 27, from a nearby town. He worked as a mechanic and had been with Christie for about 2 years. Not much else. But I was after something more than a standard background check. I needed to know who he was when he wasn't trying to be the concerned boyfriend. I ordered a full background check. It came back quickly, but there were things in that report I hadn't expected. The history of minor criminal offenses. Nothing major, but still troubling. Disorderly conduct, a few DUI charges, and something else buried deep in the records, an arrest for domestic violence. The case was closed with no conviction, but the fact that it had even been investigated was enough to make my stomach tighten. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. Evan's clean, polite exterior was starting to crack. He wasn't the perfect boyfriend. He was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had to do with Christie. I called in one of my officers, a seasoned investigator named Sarah, and had her pull up the phone records. Christie's phone had made several calls to a mysterious number the night she vanished. The number was unregistered, and it wasn't from anyone in her contacts. We ran the number through our system, but it came back as a burner phone. No name, no trace. It was a dead end. But then something else caught my eye. One of the calls from Christie's phone wasn't to the mysterious number. It was to Evan at 11:10 p.m. The call lasted only a few seconds. But why was she calling him if she was already with him? Why make another call? Was she trying to get help? Or was she trying to escape? I turned to Sarah, who was leaning over the desk beside me. I want you to look deeper into that phone. Trace any recent activity, anything that could lead us to where she might be. Sarah nodded. Got it, detective? I stood up and walked out of the room, heading toward the back of the station. I needed to talk to Christie's roommate again. There were too many things about this case that didn't add up, and the only way to get to the bottom of it was to understand who Christie really was, what she was running from. Christie's roommate, Laura, was still waiting in the same chair in the lobby. She looked more tired than I remembered, her eyes bloodshot from the hours of waiting. I could see the worry etched into her face. She had to know something else, something she hadn't told me the first time. Laura, I began, sitting down across from her. I need to ask you again. Was there anything strange going on between Christie and Evan recently? Anything that might explain why she would want to leave? Laura shifted in her seat, her fingers nervously tapping on her phone. She paused, clearly thinking. I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm accusing him, but she wasn't herself lately. She started acting distant. She told me she felt trapped. Evan, he wanted too much from her. Trapped? I asked, leaning forward. What do you mean by that? Laura hesitated again, as if she was unsure of how much to reveal. She said he was always calling her, checking in on her, and sometimes he would get angry if she didn't pick up. He wasn't violent with her, but she said he could get really controlling. She told me she wanted to break up with him. I think she was scared, detective. She didn't want to end things with him. She was afraid of what he might do. This changed everything. If Evan was controlling, if he was capable of making Christie feel trapped, that could explain a lot. Maybe she hadn't just disappeared. Maybe she had run. Maybe she'd tried to leave and Evan had stopped her. And if she was trying to break free, what did that mean for her safety now? Where is Evan now? I asked, my voice tense. I don't know, Laura replied, shaking her head. I haven't heard from her in hours. She was supposed to be home by now. I stood up, my mind racing. There was a pattern here, one I was starting to see more clearly. Christie had been trying to get away from Evan, and when she did, something went horribly wrong. I didn't know where she was yet, but I knew this wasn't just a case of a missing person. It was something far darker. I didn't waste time. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I needed to confront Evan before he had the chance to cover his tracks. With Laura's statement about Christie being scared of him, I wasn't going to let him slip through our fingers. I found him at his apartment, pacing nervously by the door when I knocked. His eyes widened when he saw me, but he didn't try to run. Instead, he opened the door with an unsettling calmness. Detective Hayes, he said, his voice too smooth. What's this about now? I need to talk to you, Evan, again, I said firmly, stepping into the small apartment. It smelled faintly of stale beer and old takeout containers. Evan's eyes flicked toward the couch, then quickly back to me, his jaw tightening. I told you everything I know. She's probably with someone else. Enough of that, I snapped. You're not getting off that easy. Your girlfriend is missing, and I know more than you think. His face hardened. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, pumped Evan. I know about the phone calls, about you getting angry when she didn't answer. I know she was planning to break up with you. You were controlling, weren't you? His eyes flickered. He quickly masked it, but I could see it. The guilt, the anger. She was the one who wanted to leave, he said, his voice low. She was always distant, always making me feel like I wasn't good enough. She wouldn't even look at me sometimes. I didn't do anything wrong. Then why hasn't anyone seen her? Why is her phone dead? Why did she call you just minutes before she went missing? Was it a cry for help? Evan's gaze shifted, but he didn't say anything. His silence spoke volumes. I pressed on. You know what happened, don't you, Evan? Christie was scared of you, and when she tried to leave, you stopped her. His jaw clenched. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. His composure was cracking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to make her stay. I didn't want to lose her. You didn't want to lose control, Evan, I countered. And now she's gone, and you're not walking away from this. Congratulations, however. Finally, an entire electronics department was located within the city limits. The room felt colder as I waited for him to break, for him to admit what I already knew. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the conflict between guilt and fear. But there was something else in his eyes now, something darker. I didn't hurt her, he said finally, his voice trembling, but he couldn't meet my gaze. She left. She ran. I stepped closer, my voice hard. We'll find out the truth, Evan. And when we do, it won't be because you wanted to fix things. He stood frozen, eyes darting around, then he looked back at me, a hint of panic setting in. I didn't. I cut him off. Don't lie to me, Evan. We'll find her, and we'll find out exactly what happened. The interrogation room felt colder now, with Evan sitting there in silence, staring at his hands. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced with a mixture of fear and denial. I could see it in his face. He was cornered. The weight of the truth was pressing down on him, suffocating him. But I wasn't done yet. We had more evidence coming in, and this time, Evan wasn't going to talk his way out of it. The phone records had been matched up. We confirmed that Christie's last call, that fleeting moment of desperation, had been to him. But it was more than that. We found evidence of a struggle, scratches on her arms, bruising around her neck. It was clear she hadn't just walked away. She hadn't left him willingly. She had fought for her life, and he had taken it from her. At first, Evan stuck to his story. She ran, she left him. But the more we pressed, the more the cracks in his story grew. I could see the lies slipping through. He was trying to cover up what he knew was coming, the inevitable collapse of his carefully constructed world. His silence was deafening now. I sat across from him, watching the sweat form on his brow, waiting for the inevitable confession. You know, Evan, I began, leaning forward, this is where it all comes down. The phone calls, the bruises, the lies, they're not going to go away. We already know what happened. It's just a matter of when you're going to tell us the truth. Evan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His gaze was fixed on the table, not meeting my eyes. It was then that I knew. It was only a matter of time. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. His voice was low, strained. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Then tell me what happened, Evan. Start at the beginning. My shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw a flicker of guilt. She was leaving me. She wanted to break up. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I could just talk to her, make her stay. I just wanted her to stay. I didn't want to lose her. His words were twisted, laced with a disturbing kind of justification. So you just kept her locked in here. You thought she would come back if you controlled her enough? He flinched, avoiding my gaze. I didn't keep her locked in here. I told her I didn't want her to go. I tried to convince her. She was upset. We fought. She told me to leave her alone, but I couldn't. I didn't want to be alone. I could hear the fear in his voice now, a desperation that had been hidden behind the lies. What did you do, Evan? He paused, and when he spoke again, the words tumbled out quickly, as if they were escaping him, as if he couldn't stop them. She tried to leave. She ran for the door, and I grabbed her. I just grabbed her, and she fell. She hit her head on the table, and then I didn't know what to do. His voice cracked as he said the next words. She was just lying there. I didn't think it was that bad, but she wasn't moving. I thought maybe she was just knocked out. I didn't mean to hurt her. But when I checked, she wasn't breathing, and I panicked. There it was, the confession. The cold, brutal truth that he had been trying so hard to hide. Edwin Lara had killed Christie Wilson, and now, with each word, he unraveled the last of his defenses. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. I just wanted her to stay. I thought if I could just make her listen. I stepped closer, my voice hard. You didn't listen, Edwin. You didn't listen to her when she tried to tell you that she was scared. You didn't listen when she tried to leave. And now she's dead. And you're not walking away from this. The room felt colder as I waited for him to break, for him to admit what I already knew. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the conflict between guilt and fear. But there was something else in his eyes now, something darker. I didn't hurt her, he said finally, his voice trembling, but he couldn't meet my gaze. She left. She ran. I stepped closer, my voice a little louder this time. We'll find out the truth, Edwin. And when we do, it won't be because you wanted to fix things. If we have 2 people left in the next 3 months, His jaw clenched. He was broken, but he was still holding on to that last thread of his lie. I didn't. I cut him off with one last question. How did she end up dead, Edwin? His silence screamed the answer.